My husband took me to the hospital gala, his voice cold as he gave me a final directive. Just smile and nod, Clarissa. You're just a housewife. Keep it simple. When the anonymous donor finally arrived, he bypassed every doctor in the room. He walked straight toward me, took my hands in his, and his eyes welled up. I built this building for you, Sarah. 40 years ago, you were the only one who believed in me. Because of you, I never married. The color drained from my husband's face instantly. I'm so glad you're here to listen. Please stick around for the rest of my story and let me know in the comments which city you're watching from so I can see just how far my journey has traveled. I stood before my bedroom mirror, clasping the pearl necklace Wesley had given me for our 20th anniversary. The pearls felt ice cold against my skin, each one a perfect manufactured sphere of elegance. At 62, I had mastered the role of the devoted wife to one of the state's most respected cardiologists, Dr. Wesley Hartwell. Clarissa, are you ready yet? Wesley's voice drifted up from downstairs, laced with that familiar, thinly veiled impatience I knew all too well. Coming, dear, I replied, taking one last look at myself. The navy dress he'd chosen for me fit perfectly. Conservative, polished, and completely unmemorable. My silvering hair was styled into the modest low bun he preferred. After 39 years of marriage, I knew exactly what was expected of me. During the 23-minute drive to St. Mary's Medical Center, we cruised through the leafy streets of our upscale neighborhood. Wesley talked about the evening, his voice dropping into that lecturing tone I'd grown so tired of. This is a massive night for the hospital, he said, tapping his fingers against the wheel of his black Mercedes. The anonymous donor is finally revealing his identity, $50 million for the new pediatric wing. It's unprecedented. I nodded on cue, watching the familiar scenery blur past the window. That's wonderful, Wesley. So many children will benefit. Just remember, he continued, his voice lowering into that tightly controlled pitch that always made my chest tighten. Tonight isn't about us. You're there to support me, nothing more. Smile, nod when people talk to you, and leave any medical discussions to me. These people don't need to hear a opinion from a housewife, I finished for him calmly, the words leaving a bitter taste on my tongue. Wesley glanced at me, his expression softening just a fraction. I didn't mean it like that, honey. You know I respect what you do at home, but tonight is professional. You understand that, right? I understood it perfectly. I had been understanding it for 39 years. The hospital ballroom was decorated like something out of a magazine. Golden light cast a warm glow over burgundy velvet drapes, and the scent of fresh roses mingled with expensive perfume. A string quartet played softly in the corner, while servers in crisp white jackets circulated with silver trays of champagne. Wesley shifted into gear immediately, his shoulders squaring as colleagues approached to shake his hand. I watched him morph from the controlling husband I knew into the charismatic, revered doctor everyone else saw. It was a performance I had witnessed countless times, and I knew exactly what my role in the ensemble was. Dr. Hartwell. Dr. Patricia Lennox, the head of internal medicine, approached with her husband. She was a woman I had always found intimidating, brilliant, accomplished, everything I had once dreamed of becoming. It is such a pleasure to see you both, Wesley said, beaming as he placed a possessive hand on the small of my back. Patricia, you remember my wife, Clarissa. Dr. Lennox's smile was polite but distant. Of course. Lovely to see you again, Clarissa. Still busy with your gardening club? The condescension in her voice was subtle but unmistakable. I had learned to recognize these moments, where my value was measured only by my association with Wesley and where my own thoughts and opinions were rendered irrelevant. The garden keeps me very grounded, I replied with the smile I'd perfected over decades. That's nice, Dr. Lennox said, already turning her attention back to Wesley. So, tell me about your latest research. I hear you're pioneering a new approach to minimally invasive surgery. Once again, I became invisible. Standing there while they dove into medical jargon I understood perfectly well, but was never permitted to discuss. It was such a cruel irony. 40 years ago, the person asking those questions and sharing those insights should have been me. Our housekeeper, Elena, had helped me get ready tonight. When she fastened my pearls, she caught my eye in the mirror and gave me a look of knowing empathy. Elena never spoke about what she observed in our home, but her silence said everything. She saw the subtle dismissals, the ways Wesley made me feel small, and the constant reminders of my place in his world. "Mrs. Hartwell," Elena had whispered softly, "you look beautiful tonight, just like the brilliant woman I know." Now, surrounded by the elite of the medical community and feeling more alone than ever, the memory of her words warmed me. The evening proceeded as expected. Wesley introduced me to donors and colleagues, always with the same line. "This is my wife, Clarissa. She runs our home beautifully." Every introduction was a gentle reminder of the limitations of my role, a reminder of my insignificance in the grand scheme of his life. I excused myself to the restroom, needing a moment away from the rehearsed smiles and polite disdain. In the marble-tiled room, I stared at myself again. When did I become this person? When did I let myself become so small that I almost disappeared? The woman in the mirror had kind but tired eyes. She wore expensive clothes and perfect makeup. But there was a hollowness to her, a sense that something vital was missing. I thought of the young woman I was at 22, full of dreams and ambition, Sarah Margaret Thompson. That was my name before I became Mrs. Wesley Hartwell. Sarah had wanted to heal, to make a difference in the world. She had gotten into medical school on pure grit and top-tier grades. But Sarah had made a choice. Or rather, Sarah had been persuaded to make a choice. Wesley had said that love was about compromise, about building a life together, about trust. "Ladies and gentlemen," the hospital administrator's voice boomed through the hall as I returned. "May I have your attention, please?" The crowd quieted, all eyes turning to the small stage. Wesley found me immediately, his hand returning to that familiar spot on my back. "Tonight marks a historic moment for St. Mary's," the administrator continued. "Thanks to the incredible generosity of our anonymous benefactor, we will be breaking ground on a state-of-the-art pediatric wing that will serve our community for generations." Polite applause rippled through the room. I found myself deeply moved by the gesture. Donating $50 million specifically to help sick children was truly remarkable. "And now," the administrator said, his smile widening, "I am pleased to announce that our generous benefactor has agreed to reveal his identity tonight." The applause grew louder. Beside me, Wesley stood taller, his professional curiosity clearly piqued. "Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming the founder and CEO of Mitchell Pharmaceuticals, Mr. Harrison Mitchell." The name hit me like a physical blow. Harrison Mitchell. Hearing it after 40 years felt like something inside my chest had cracked open. The crowd parted, and a man in an impeccably tailored black tuxedo walked toward the stage. He was tall, distinguished, with silver hair and the kind of confident ease that comes from success earned rather than inherited. But it was his eyes that stopped my breathing. Those intelligent, caring eyes were exactly as I remembered them a lifetime ago. Wesley's hand tightened on my back, and I realized I must have made a sound, an involuntary reaction. "Do you know him?" Wesley whispered, his voice holding a tone I couldn't quite identify. I couldn't answer. I couldn't even breathe properly. Harrison Mitchell stood at the microphone, thanking the crowd, explaining his vision for pediatric care, but all I could hear was the rush of blood in my own ears. He had changed, of course. 40 years changes everyone. But the core of him, that passionate dedication, that gentle strength, it was exactly as I remembered. "This new building," Harrison said, his voice carrying effortlessly through the sound system, "will be dedicated to someone very special. Someone who taught me that healing is about more than just medicine. It's about hope, compassion, and never giving up on those we love." I felt Wesley's curious gaze on me, but I couldn't look away from the stage. Harrison's eyes were scanning the crowd now, searching. "In fact," he continued, his voice softening, "that person is here tonight." Then his gaze cut through the crowded room and found me. Time stopped. 40 years vanished in an instant. I saw the light of recognition spark in his eyes, followed by something deeper. Joy, pain, longing, all of it mixed together in a look that made my legs weak. He stepped away from the microphone and moved purposefully through the crowd. People stepped aside, likely thinking he was heading toward the hospital administrators. But I knew exactly where he was heading. Wesley's hand pressed harder against my back, a warning I couldn't have heeded even if I wanted to. Harrison walked straight to us, his eyes never leaving mine. When he arrived, he ignored Wesley entirely. He opened his arms, and without a second thought, I stepped into his embrace. The hug was everything I remembered, yet entirely unexpected. Strong arms wrapped around me, and in that moment, the world I had carefully constructed for myself completely collapsed. "Sarah," he whispered against my ear, his voice rough with emotion. The name dropped between us like a stone in a still pond, creating ripples. When he pulled back just enough to keep his hands gently on my shoulders, his eyes shimmered with unshed tears. "I built this building for you, Sarah," he said, his voice audible in the sudden silence of the ballroom. 40 years ago, you were the only one who believed in me." The silence around us was deafening. I could feel the shock radiating from Wesley beside me. I could feel the curious stares of everyone in the room. Harrison's voice grew even firmer, more certain. "Because of you, I never married." Wesley's face had gone pale. The silence that followed felt infinite. I stood there, caught between two worlds. The safe but stifling life I'd built with Wesley, and the passionate dreams I'd buried so deep I'd almost convinced myself they never existed. Wesley was gripping my arm now. That possessiveness suddenly didn't feel like protection, it felt like control. "I think there's been some misunderstanding," Wesley said, his voice carefully modulated but carrying a sharpness that anyone who knew him would recognize as dangerous. "My wife's name is Clarissa." Harrison didn't take his eyes off me as he responded. "When I knew her, her name was Sarah. Dr. Sarah Thompson, one of the finest medical students I ever had the privilege to study with. Dr. Sarah Thompson." The name hit me like a physical blow, calling back memories I'd spent decades trying to suppress. Late nights in the medical library, the rush of understanding complex diagnoses, the dream of saving lives and changing the world. Before I was Mrs. Wesley Hartwell, I was that woman. "Sarah doesn't exist anymore," I whispered, barely audible even to myself. Harrison's expression softened, and for a moment I saw past the successful businessman to the young medical student I used to know. "She's still there. She's standing right in front of me." People around us began to whisper, sensing the drama but not understanding the cause. I could feel the weight of their gaze, their curiosity, their judgment. This was not how I had imagined this night going. In a life as carefully ordered as mine, no night was supposed to go this way. "Perhaps we should continue this conversation in private," Wesley interjected, regaining his professional charm, though his eyes were cold as ice. "I'm sure Mr. Mitchell has many people to greet tonight." But Harrison didn't back down. "Actually, I was hoping to talk to Sarah, to Clarissa, about a position I've envisioned for the new building, as the executive director of pediatric services." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Executive director. A real position, an opportunity to return to the world of medicine that had once been my passion and my calling. Wesley's laugh was sharp and dismissive. "I'm afraid my wife is hardly qualified for that level of responsibility. She's been out of the medical field for, well, decades." The condescension in his voice ignited something inside me, but Harrison's next words turned that spark into a flame. "On the contrary," Harrison said calmly. "I reviewed Sarah's academic records. She graduated at the top of her class at Johns Hopkins. She completed 2 years of medical school before—" He paused, pointedly, "before other priorities took precedence." Other priorities. That was one way to put it. Another way was that Wesley had convinced me that love meant sacrifice, that a good wife supported her husband's career rather than pursuing her own, that trying to do both was selfish and unfair to the family we planned to build. "Medical school was a long time ago," I said quietly, even though part of me wanted to scream that I still remembered every anatomy lesson, every diagnostic procedure. "Things change. People change." "Do they?" Harrison asked, his voice gentle but insistent. "Or do we just convince ourselves that people change so we can make peace with the choices we've made?" The question was too close to the truth. I could feel Wesley's tension beside me. I could feel his rising anger at this public challenge to his authority and his version of our story. "Excuse us," Wesley said firmly, placing a hand on my elbow to lead me away. "My wife and I really—" "Wait," Harrison interrupted, reaching into his jacket pocket. "I was going to give you this anyway." He handed me a small white card. As I took it, our fingers brushed briefly, a contact that sent a shiver through me I hadn't felt in 40 years. The card was simple. His name, a phone number, and on the back, handwritten, "The door is always open. H." Wesley tried to see what was written on the card, but I instinctively curled my fingers over it. "Think about it," Harrison said, his voice for me alone, yet carrying through the quiet. "The children we could help, the lives we could save, and the work that still needs to be done. He stepped back, acknowledging Wesley with a polite nod for the first time. Dr. Hartwell, I trust you understand the importance of supporting talented people in pursuing their calling. The irony in his words was subtle but unmistakable. Wesley gritted his teeth. My wife's calling, Wesley said, feigning politeness, has always been to support my medical career and manage our home. She's been very successful in that role. Has she? Harrison asked, and something in his tone stopped several other conversations nearby. Or has she simply been compromising? The word hung between them like a gauntlet. I felt caught between two forces, caught between two versions of the person I was supposed to be. Wesley's hand on my arm was a reminder of 40 years of carefully constructed life. And Harrison's presence was a door I thought I had locked permanently. I need some air, I said suddenly, needing space to think, to breathe, to process everything that was happening. But as I started toward the French doors leading to the patio, Harrison's voice stopped me. Sarah, he said, and the name still felt like coming home. When I said I never married, I meant it. I turned to face him, conscious that Wesley was watching every micro-expression on my face. After we lost touch, I poured everything into my studies, then the research, then building the company. I kept telling myself I was waiting for the right person. He smiled, with a touch of sadness and self-deprecation. But the truth is, I was waiting for you to realize that you deserved better than to compromise on your dreams. Wesley stepped forward, his professional mask cracking. You listen to me right now? No, Harrison said calmly. I think it's time someone listened to what she has to say. He turned back to me, his eyes intense and kind. What do you want, Sarah? Not what anyone else wants for you. What do you want? The question was simple and devastating. When was the last time someone had asked me what I wanted? When was the last time I had asked myself? I looked around the ballroom at all these accomplished medical professionals, seeing the life I could have had. Then I looked at Wesley, who was red-faced with anger, barely containing his rage at being so publicly challenged. I began, then stopped. The words felt foreign in my mouth. She wants to go home, Wesley answered for me, his tone brooking no argument. This has been quite enough excitement for one evening. But I didn't move. Something in Harrison's presence, his unwavering belief that the person I used to be was still somewhere inside me, kept me hesitant. The position, I heard myself say, what would it actually entail? Wesley's hand tightened on my arm, a warning, but for the first time in decades, I ignored it. Harrison's face brightened. Overseeing the integration of pediatric services between departments, working with families to coordinate care, developing programs that address not just the medical needs, but the emotional support systems. His voice grew more passionate as he spoke. It's exactly the kind of holistic approach you used to talk about. Patient advocacy with the actual power to make a change. Patient advocacy. The term unlocked a memory so vivid I gasped. It was me at 21, sitting in a lecture hall, taking notes on the professor's discussion of patient-centered care. I had raised my hand to ask about implementing support systems for families dealing with chronic pediatric illness. The professor had praised my question, saying it showed the kind of thinking that would make me an excellent doctor. Wesley had been in that same lecture hall that day. That was actually where we met. He had approached me afterward, impressed by my question, drawn to my passion for helping children. You're wasting your time with pediatrics, he had told me during one of our early dates, as we sat in an expensive restaurant I could never have afforded on my student budget. Cardiology is where the real money and prestige are. Adults can actually appreciate the complexity of what you do. But for me, it was never about the money or the prestige, it was about the children. I need to think about it, I finally said, my voice stronger than I expected. Wesley's grip on my arm became almost painful. Clarissa, we need to discuss this in private. Yes, Harrison said, his eyes full of understanding. Of course, but don't think for too long. Sometimes opportunities have an expiration date. He nodded politely to Wesley, then turned to me one last time. It was good to see you again, Sarah. Truly. As he walked away, disappearing back into the crowd of admirers and medical colleagues, I found myself trembling. The business card felt like it was burning in my palm. Wesley guided me toward the exit with firm determination, offering only brief nods to those who tried to speak with us. The ride home was silent, save for the sound of his breathing. As we drove mile after mile, his breathing became more controlled, more rhythmic, a sure sign that an internal storm was brewing. Our house on Magnolia Heights looked exactly the same as when we'd left. Perfectly manicured, impressively large, but despite the warm lights, it somehow felt cold and empty. Elena had left a light on in the living room, a habit she'd formed over the years to make our return feel less desolate. It wasn't until we were inside and the door was locked behind us that Wesley finally spoke. What in the world was that? I carefully placed my purse on the marble entry table, buying myself time. I don't know what you're talking about. Don't, his voice sharpened, dropping all pretense of politeness. Don't insult my intelligence, Clarissa. You know exactly what I'm talking about. I turned to face him, seeing the man I married clearly for the first time in years. The charm was gone, replaced by something harder, something more calculating. Harrison Mitchell is someone I knew in medical school, I said, choosing my words carefully. Before we met, Harrison Mitchell, who happens to be worth $800 million, and who happens to have donated $50 million to the hospital where I work. Wesley's laugh was bitter. How convenient that he didn't mention this connection in any of the preliminary meetings. Maybe because there was nothing to mention. Nothing to mention. Wesley stepped closer, his voice dropping into that tightly controlled tone I'd learned to see as a warning sign. He called you Sarah. He said he built a hospital building for you. He offered you a job and you stood there like... Like what, Wesley? Like you were considering it. The accusation hung between us. Because the truth was, for a moment, I was considering it. Standing in that ballroom, I'd allowed myself to imagine a different life. A life where my opinions mattered, my intelligence was valued, and I was more than just someone's wife. It was a surprise, I said finally. I hadn't seen him in 40 years. But you knew he was successful. No, I didn't. Don't lie to me! Wesley's voice was growing louder now, losing its control. The way you reacted when you saw him tonight? That wasn't the reaction of someone who barely remembered him. You don't light up like that for a casual acquaintance. Light up? Did I light up? I thought of Harrison's presence, the feeling of being seen, truly seen, by someone who remembered who I used to be. I was surprised, I repeated, that's all. Wesley stared at me for a long time, his eyes searching my face for something I couldn't identify. Then he turned abruptly and walked to the bar cart in the living room. 40 years, he said, pouring himself 3 fingers of scotch. For 40 years, I have given you everything. A beautiful home, financial security, social standing. I protected you, provided for you. I've never asked for anything from you except loyalty. Loyalty. The word felt abrupt in the air between us. And I have always been loyal, I said calmly. Have you? He turned to face me, glass in hand. Because tonight, standing in front of half the medical community, it didn't look like loyalty at all. It looked like a woman ready to discard everything we've built for a fantasy of what might have been. That isn't... He offered you a job, Clarissa. A job you aren't qualified for, a job you never worked for, a job you couldn't possibly handle after 40 years as a housewife. Every word was chosen with precision, designed to cut deep. Did you really think no one would notice how inappropriate that was? How that made me look, how that made him look. Not how I felt, not how I felt being dismissed, belittled, and reduced to nothing more than a marital status in front of a room full of professionals. No, it was how that made him look. Maybe I could handle it, I said. The words surprised me, and they seemed to surprise Wesley too. He actually laughed. Handle it? Clarissa, you haven't worked outside this house in decades. You've never managed a budget larger than our household expenses. You've never managed staff or handled administrative duties. What makes you think you could walk into a major medical center and manage a department? Every question was like a tiny slap, designed to remind me of my limitations, my small world, my lack of qualification to do anything outside the life he had chosen for me. But something deep inside me, something that had been asleep for 40 years, was waking up. I finished 2 years of medical school, I said quietly. I had a 4.0 average. I had research positions I turned down to marry you. Wesley's expression hardened. Medical school was 40 years ago. The field has changed entirely. You'd be lost within a week. Would I? Yes. And more importantly, you would embarrass yourself. And you would embarrass me. He took a long swallow of scotch, watching me over the rim of the glass. Is that really what you want? To make yourself a laughingstock because an old flame showed up with more money than sense just to chase some midlife fantasy? The card in my palm seemed to pulse with the possibilities, but Wesley's words were designed to make those possibilities feel shameful, impractical, and foolish. "I'm not chasing anything," I said. "I'm just listening." "Then stop listening and throw away whatever he gave you." We stared at each other across the beautiful, cold living room. Outside, I could hear the wind rustling through the magnolia trees that gave our street its name. Inside, the floor clock marked the seconds with mechanical precision. "I think I'm going to sleep," I finally said. Wesley nodded, already turning back to his scotch. "Good. And, Clarissa, tomorrow we're going to forget that the whole evening ever happened. We're going to go back to our normal lives and pretend that man never walked into that ballroom." I walked up the stairs slowly, my hand trailing over the mahogany banister Wesley was so proud of. In our bedroom, I sat on the edge of the bed and finally opened my palm to look at Harrison's card one more time. The door is always open. But as I sat in the darkness of our beautiful empty bedroom, I wondered if some doors, once closed, could ever really be opened again. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed, Wesley sleeping beside me, listening to his steady breathing. I turned Harrison's card over and over between my fingers until the edges were soft. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face at the gala. Older, more distinguished, but with the same passion and focus I remembered from our medical school days. Sarah Margaret Thompson. I hadn't heard anyone say that name out loud in 40 years, but hearing it had awakened something inside me I thought had long since died and been buried. When dawn finally crawled in through our bedroom curtains, I slipped out of bed and crept downstairs to the kitchen. Elena wouldn't be there for another 2 hours, and Wesley never came down before 7:30. For the first time, this house was mine alone. I made coffee with trembling hands and sat at the granite kitchen island, staring out at the garden I'd spent years perfectly maintaining. Every flower, every shrub, every meticulously planned border was a testament to the life I'd built with Wesley. Beautiful, controlled, but ultimately hollow. The coffee was bitter, or maybe that was just the taste of regret in my mouth. I found myself remembering things I had forced myself to forget. Like how Harrison used to study, with intense focus but always ready to help anyone who was struggling. He had a gift for explaining complex concepts in clear, lucid ways. More than a few times he had helped me through particularly difficult anatomy or pharmacology problems. But it wasn't just his academic talent that drew me in. Harrison cared about his future patients from the heart, a care that went beyond textbook knowledge. He would stay late after class to ask professors about cutting-edge research, not to show off, but because he truly longed to find better ways to heal. Even back then, Wesley was different. He was smooth, confident, thinking already like a successful doctor rather than a student still learning. When he approached me after that lecture on patient-centered care, he wasn't interested in discussing medical concepts at all. He was interested in me. "You're wasting your passion on pediatrics," he had told me during our third date, as we sat in an expensive restaurant I could never have afforded on my student budget. Children can't appreciate the complexity of medical intervention the way adults can. There's no intellectual challenge there. I had tried to explain that for me, it wasn't about the intellectual challenge. It was about helping the most vulnerable patients, those who couldn't speak for themselves. But Wesley had just given me that indulgent smile and changed the subject. Footsteps on the stairs pulled me back to reality. Wesley appeared in the kitchen doorway, already in his perfectly pressed shirt and tie, his silver hair groomed exactly as it had been for the last 20 years. "You're up early," he observed, heading for the coffee machine. "Couldn't sleep." He poured the coffee with the precise, practiced movements he brought to every aspect of his life. "I'm not surprised. Last night was challenging." Challenging, that was one word for it. Wesley sat on the other side of the kitchen island, his expression deliberately neutral. "I've been thinking about what happened at the gala, about your reaction when you saw that man." "Harrison," I said calmly. "His name is Harrison." Wesley's jaw tightened, almost imperceptibly. "Yes, Harrison Mitchell. I did some digging this morning." Of course he did. Wesley never left anything to chance. He never entered a situation without gathering every available piece of information. "He's quite successful," Wesley continued, his tone conversational, yet carrying an undercurrent I couldn't fully identify. "Built Mitchell Pharmaceuticals from the ground up after his residency. Never married, no children. Dedicated his entire life to his work." The way he said it made it sound like a character flaw, a half-lived life. Obsessive personalities often have trouble with interpersonal relationships, Wesley added, taking a sip of his coffee. Too focused on their own ambition to truly invest in others. I didn't say a word, but something inside me bristled at that description of Harrison. The man I remembered was anything but self-absorbed. He was driven, yes, but it was always in service of something greater than himself. I also made a few calls regarding this supposed job offer, Wesley continued. My coffee cup paused halfway to my lips. What kind of calls? I spoke with Dr. Patterson, the hospital administrator. Apparently, Mr. Mitchell did mention a vague desire to hire someone to oversee the integration of pediatric services, but it was just a passing thought. No official paperwork, no substance, and certainly not a position someone with your background could realistically handle. Every word was carefully selected, designed to puncture any hope I might have harbored that Harrison's offer was real. My background, I repeated softly. Clarissa, I don't mean to be harsh, but we need to be realistic. You haven't worked in a professional environment in decades. You've never managed staff, never navigated hospital politics, and never dealt with the compliance regulations that come with managing medical services. His voice shifted to that gentle, condescending tone he used when he thought he was protecting me from the cruelty of reality. It would set you up to fail. Perhaps, I said, but a strength was rising within me, fighting back. Or perhaps I'm more capable than you imagine. Wesley set his cup down with a sharp, crisp click. What is that supposed to mean? It means I'm not the same person I was at 23. I've spent 40 years managing our household, our finances, our social obligations. I've organized galas, coordinated contractors, and navigated complex schedules. I am not a helpless child, Wesley. The words surprised us both. I hadn't intended to sound so defensive, so confident. Wesley stared at me for a long time. Of course you're capable. I've never said you weren't, but there's a difference between managing a home and running a hospital department. The liability alone is immense. One mistake could ruin both of our reputations. Both of our reputations. Not mine, not my risk, but ours. As if my potential failure would somehow reflect on him. And if I didn't fail? I asked quietly. What if I was actually good at it? What if I had something of value to contribute? Wesley's expression turned cold. Is that what this is really about? Throwing away 40 years of marriage to chase a fantasy job that might not even exist? If this is about rekindling some college-era romance? This isn't about Harrison, I said, though I wasn't entirely sure it was true. This is about me, about who I am and who I might have been. You are my wife. You are the woman I have loved and provided for 40 years. Isn't that enough? The question hung between us like a challenge. Is it enough? Had it ever been enough? I need some air, I said, standing up abruptly. I think I'm going to work in the garden for a while. Wesley nodded, but his expression remained troubled. Just promise me you'll think carefully before doing anything rash. We have a good life, Clarissa. Don't let one night of nostalgia destroy everything we've built. I went outside into the garden I had tended so meticulously, breathing in the scent of jasmine and morning dew. This had always been my sanctuary, the only part of our home that felt entirely mine. Wesley had never shown the slightest interest in gardening, so he gave me complete freedom to design and maintain it as I pleased. Sitting on the stone bench beneath the old oak tree, I pulled Harrison's card from my pocket to look at it again. The paper was expensive, simple, elegant, professional, but not flashy. I found myself wondering what his life had been like for the last 40 years. Wesley made it sound like he lived some dull, lonely existence, too focused on work to form meaningful connections. But what if that wasn't true? What if Harrison simply chose a different path, one that allowed him to pursue his passion without compromise? My phone buzzed in my pocket, a text from an unknown number. Sarah, hope you don't mind me reaching out directly. I got your number from the hospital directory. I wanted to apologize for putting you in an awkward spot last night. That wasn't my intent. I just wanted you to know that the position I offered is completely serious. I'm in town for the next few days if you want to discuss it further. No pressure, just a conversation between old friends. Harrison. I read the message 3 times, my heart racing. He'd called me Sarah again, and he was serious about the job. I started to type a reply, stopped, then started again. Harrison, it was good to see you. The offer is unexpected. I don't know what to think. I deleted it and tried again. I appreciate you reaching out. Last night was overwhelming. Delete. Thank you for the message. I would like to talk. My finger hovered over the send button for a full minute before I pressed it. The reply came within seconds. Would you like to get coffee this afternoon? There's a small place on Elm Street called Rosemary's. Very quiet, very private. 2 o'clock? I knew Rosemary's. It was an independent little cafe in the Arts District. The kind of place Wesley would never think to look for me. The kind of place where two old friends could talk without becoming fodder for gossip. I'll be there, I typed back before I could change my mind. After sending the message, I sat in the garden for a long time, watching the sun climb higher in the sky. Part of me felt guilty, feeling that agreeing to see Harrison was a betrayal of Wesley. But a larger part of me felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Anticipation. For the first time in decades, I was going to do something entirely for myself. When I finally went back inside, Wesley had already left for the hospital. Elena was in the kitchen, humming softly to herself as she prepared what looked like his favorite breakfast casserole for the next morning. "Morning, Mrs. Hartwell," she said with her usual warm smile. "You look like you have a lot on your mind today." Elena had worked for us for 15 years. In that time, she'd witnessed countless tiny interactions between Wesley and me, seen the way he spoke to me, seen the way he made decisions about our lives without consulting me. She never said anything directly, but sometimes I caught her looking at me with a protective expression. "Elena," I said impulsively, "what do you think of people who make huge changes late in life?" She stopped her food preparation and thought about it seriously. "I think life is too short to spend it being someone you're not," she finally said. "My grandmother left my grandfather when she was 65 and moved to Mexico to open a restaurant. Everyone said she was crazy, too old, too late. But she lived another 15 happy years doing exactly what she loved. Don't you worry about her making such a big change at her age?" Elena smiled. "I'd be more worried about what would happen if she didn't. Sometimes staying is scarier than leaving, you know." Her words stayed with me as I went upstairs to shower and change. Standing in my walk-in closet, surrounded by the carefully curated clothes Wesley preferred, understated, elegant, age-appropriate, I found myself reaching for something different. Instead of my usual conservative blouse and slacks, I chose a soft blue sweater that brought out the color of my eyes, and a pair of jeans I rarely wore. Nothing dramatic, nothing that would draw attention, but it felt more like me. As I was dressing, my eyes landed on a box tucked away on the top shelf of the closet. I had to use the step stool to reach it, but when I opened it, I found what I was looking for: my medical school textbooks. I had kept them when we moved into this house 40 years ago, telling Wesley I might want to refer to them one day. He'd rolled his eyes, saying it was silly to keep obsolete medical texts, but he'd allowed me to store them in the attic. At some point over the years, I'd moved them into my closet, though I didn't remember exactly when or why. I pulled out the old anatomy textbook, flipping through pages I had once known by heart. The margins were filled with my own handwriting, notes, questions, and insights recorded as a 20-year-old student who had been passionate about learning everything there was to know about the human body. The young woman who had written these notes seemed like a stranger to me now. She had been so confident, so sure of her purpose, so unafraid to ask questions and challenge assumptions. What happened to her? I knew the answer, of course. She'd fallen in love with a charismatic, successful doctor who convinced her that love meant sacrifice, that a good wife supported her husband's career rather than pursuing her own, that trying to do both was selfish. But sitting there with my old textbook in my hands, I wondered if that young woman had really disappeared, or if she'd just been buried under 40 years of carefully learned helplessness. At 1:45, I stood before the bathroom mirror, applying lipstick with a slightly trembling hand. I looked different somehow, not younger exactly, but more present, more alive. As I left the house, Elena called out from the kitchen, "You look beautiful today, Mrs. Hartwell, just like yourself." Like myself? When was the last time someone had said that to me? The drive to Rosemary's took 12 minutes, winding through streets I rarely ventured down. This part of town had a more bohemian flair than our neighborhood, filled with galleries and independent shops where people looked like they had chosen their own paths rather than following a preset script. I found a parking spot across from the cafe and sat in the car for a moment, gathering my courage. Through the large front window, I could see Harrison already sitting at a corner table, reading what looked like a medical journal. Even after 40 years, he still had that same look of intense focus I remembered. Taking a deep breath, I got out of the car and crossed the street. When I pushed the door open, the bell chimed, and Harrison looked up immediately, his face breaking into a smile that was both familiar and entirely new. "Sarah," he said as he stood to greet me, "thank you for coming. As he pulled out my chair, I realized Wesley had never done that, never treated me with that kind of thoughtful courtesy. I wasn't sure I would, I admitted as I sat down. But you did, that says something. The barista came by to take our orders. I'll have a latte and Harrison will have black coffee. Apparently, some things never changed. When we were alone again, Harrison leaned forward slightly, his expression serious but kind. I owe you an apology, he said. Last night I let my emotions get the better of me. I shouldn't have put you in that position in front of your husband and so many others. You were honest, I said quietly. That's not something I'm used to. Something flickered across his face. Concern, perhaps, or understanding. Tell me about your life, Sarah. The real version, not the public one. The question was so simple, so direct that it caught me off guard. When was the last time someone had asked about my life, asked what I wanted, what I thought, what I felt? I'm not sure there's a real version left, I finally said. I've been Mrs. Wesley Hartwell for so long, I'm not even sure who Sarah is anymore. She's sitting right across from me, Harrison said gently. I can see her. And somehow incredibly I believed him. Sitting in that quiet cafe, looking at Harrison across the table, I felt something uncoiling deep inside me, something that had been pulled tight for 40 years. The afternoon sun streamed through the window, casting soft shadows on his face. For a moment, I saw both the young medical student I knew and the successful man he had become. I want to show you something, Harrison said, reaching into his briefcase. He pulled out a manila folder and placed it on the table between us. The architectural plans for the pediatric wing. I hesitated before opening the folder. Looking at these plans would make all of this real, would take it out of the realm of impossible fantasy and into something concrete and terrifying. Go ahead, Harrison encouraged gently. I designed it with you in mind. The blueprints were beautiful, more than beautiful. They were revolutionary. Instead of the cold, intimidating medical environment I had expected, the plans showed warm, welcoming spaces with natural light, family areas integrated into treatment rooms, and play areas that seemed woven throughout the clinical spaces. This section, Harrison said, pointing to a suite of rooms near the main entrance, is what I envision as a family advocacy center. A place where someone can coordinate care between departments, help families navigate the system, and ensure that no child falls through the cracks. His passion was evident as he spoke. For him, this wasn't just a building project. It was a vision of healing that went beyond medical intervention and encompassed the whole human experience of illness and recovery. This is exactly the model you used to talk about in school, he continued. Remember the paper you wrote on integrated pediatric care? About treating the child and the family as a whole, rather than just focusing on the diagnosis? I did remember. I'd spent weeks researching that paper, interviewing families, observing in the pediatric ward. It had been one of the proudest academic achievements of my young life. Wesley said that paper was a waste of time, I found myself confessing. He said I was being too emotional about medicine, that successful doctors needed to maintain professional distance. Harrison's expression darkened slightly. Professional distance has its place, but medicine without compassion isn't medicine. It's just technical repair work. I traced the architectural lines with my finger, seeing in them everything I had once dreamed of accomplishing. This is incredible, Harrison, but I don't understand why you think I could manage a project like this. Because you already know how to do everything this position requires, he said simply. You know how to listen to people, how to coordinate complex schedules, and how to advocate for the right thing when it's inconvenient. You've been doing these things for 40 years. You just haven't been getting paid for it. His words struck home. Those years spent organizing Wesley's professional life, managing our household staff, coordinating the complex schedule of his surgeries, meetings, and social obligations. It was like running a small business. But I'd never thought of it that way. There's something else, Harrison said, his voice dropping. I need to tell you something about why I really built this building. I looked up from the plans, sensing a shift in his mood. After you. After we lost touch, I poured myself into my studies, graduated first in my residency class, and got into a prestigious fellowship. I told myself I was moving on, building the career we'd both dreamed of. He paused, gazing out the cafe window. But every patient I treated, every research project I took on, every business decision I made, part of me was thinking about what you would say, how you would handle this. Harrison, let me finish, he said gently. I never married because I kept comparing everyone to you. Not the 22-year-old you, but the person I knew you could become. The brilliant, compassionate doctor you were destined to be. The confession hung between us, laden with 40 years of what-ifs and could-haves. You can't build a life around a person who doesn't exist anymore, I said softly. But you do exist. You're sitting right here. His gaze met mine, intense and certain. Sarah, I've spent 40 years building something, hoping it would be worthy of the woman who believed I could change the world when I was just a struggling med student. I felt tears pricking at my eyes and blinked them back. You're putting too much pressure on me. It's not pressure, it's possibility. Harrison reached across the table and took my hand. I'm not asking you to be someone you're not. I'm asking you to remember who you are. His touch sent a jolt through me. It wasn't exactly attraction, but recognition. It was the feeling of being seen by someone who remembered I'd once had dreams of my own. Tell me about the job, I said, needing to focus on something concrete and manageable. Harrison's face brightened. The executive director position would involve coordinating care between pediatric subspecialties, developing family support programs, and overseeing the integration of new services. You'd work directly with department heads to ensure a seamless patient experience. Listening to him describe the role, I found myself already organizing the challenges in my head, thinking through solutions, feeling that long-forgotten thrill of solving complex problems. The starting salary is $150,000 a year, Harrison continued, plus full benefits and performance-based advancement opportunities. $150,000. I struggled to process the number. Wesley gave me a $2,000 monthly allowance for personal expenses, treating it like a generous handout. The idea of earning my own paycheck, of having my own financial independence, was both exhilarating and terrifying. What about my lack of recent experience? I asked. That's why we start with a 6-month trial period. You'd shadow the current acting director, attend department meetings, and familiarize yourself with the hospital system. No pressure, no permanent commitment, unless we're both confident it's going to work. A trial period, a way to dip my toe in the water rather than jumping off a cliff. I need to think about it, I said, though part of me wanted to say yes immediately. Of course, but Sarah, there's something else you should know. Harrison's expression turned serious. After seeing you last night, I did some digging. I wanted to understand what happened after med school, how you ended up where you are. My stomach tightened. What kind of digging? I have contacts at Johns Hopkins. I inquired about your academic records. His jaw tightened slightly. Did you know you were accepted into the pediatric residency program at Children's Hospital? A fully funded fast track, straight to attending status. The words hit me like a physical blow. That's impossible. Wesley said I wasn't accepted anywhere. He said my grades weren't good enough for the competitive programs. Harrison's eyes were filled with something like rage. Your grades were stellar, top 5% of the class. The residency director specifically noted you as one of the most promising candidates they'd ever seen. The cafe seemed to spin around me, but I had never received an acceptance letter. The acceptance letter was sent to your home address, the one you were living at with Wesley after you got engaged. The truth hit me like a tsunami. Wesley had intercepted my acceptance letter. He had hidden my future, lied to me, and convinced me that my medical career was a dead end. And convinced me that I would be giving up my dreams for the sake of our marriage. Oh my God, I whispered. Harrison leaned forward, concern evident on his face. I'm sorry, I struggled with whether or not to tell you, but I thought you had a right to know. He lied to me. The words were flat, devoid of emotion, because the full weight of the betrayal was too much to process all at once. For 40 years, he'd made me believe I wasn't good enough. Sarah, he stole my life. My voice grew louder and other customers in the cafe began to glance our way. He sabotaged my career and then spent 40 years making me feel grateful for his sacrifice. Harrison reached across the table and took my hand again, his touch steady and grounding. I know this is devastating. I know it changes everything. But it also means something important. You were never the failure he tried to make you believe you were. I looked down at his hand covering mine, struggling to absorb the magnitude of everything I'd just learned. All those years of Wesley's subtle dismissals, his constant reminders that I wasn't qualified for professional work, his insistence that he was protecting me from a world I couldn't handle, all of it was built on a lie. What am I supposed to do with this information? I asked, my voice barely audible. That's up to you. But Sarah, you have a choice now. You have proof that you were never supposed to be just someone's wife. You were meant to be a doctor, a healer, someone who could make a difference in the world. The weight of that possibility was almost unbearable. For 40 years I'd accepted Wesley's version of events, accepted his explanation of why my dreams had to be sacrificed for our marriage. But if he'd been lying the whole time, if I'd always had the capacity— "I have to go," I said suddenly, standing up from the table. "I need to think about this." Harrison stood up too, his expression full of understanding. "Of course. But Sarah, whatever you decide, please don't let fear make the choice for you. You've been controlled by other people's limitations for too long." As I picked up my purse, my hand trembling slightly, Harrison pulled out another card and placed it on the table. "That's my personal cell number," he said. "If you need someone to talk to, day or night, call me. If you decide you want to tour the hospital, see what we're building, my offer still stands." I took the card, noticing that it was different from the business card he'd given me last night. This one was handwritten, more personal, more intimate. "Thank you," I managed to say, "for the coffee, for your honesty, for everything. Thank you for coming. Thank you for giving me the chance to explain." He paused, adding softly, "For the first time in 40 years, I feel incredibly hopeful about something." On the drive home, my emotions were a blur. Anger at Wesley's betrayal, grief for the life I could have had, and fear about what I was supposed to do with this information. But beneath it all, something else was growing. A small flame of possibility that had been extinguished for so long I'd forgotten it existed. When I pulled into the driveway, Wesley's car was already there. He never came home before 6 o'clock unless something was wrong. I found him in his study, sitting behind his mahogany desk with papers spread out before him. He looked up when I walked in, his expression unreadable. "We need to talk," he said. "Yes," I agreed, though I wasn't sure I was ready for the conversation that was about to unfold. "We do." Wesley gestured to the chair across from his desk. This was a chair I'd sat in for 40 years, discussing household matters, social obligations, and the trivialities of our shared life. But this time was different. This time, I held information he didn't know I possessed. "I did some digging into your friend, Mr. Mitchell," Wesley began, his tone deliberately neutral, "about his business practices, his reputation in the medical community. Harrison is highly respected," I said. "His company has developed some of the most important pediatric drugs of the last 2 decades. Wesley raised an eyebrow at my use of Harrison's first name. "Yes, he's successful, but success doesn't always mean good judgment in personal matters." "What is that supposed to mean?" "It means a man who builds a $50 million hospital building for a woman he knew 40 years ago may not be making rational decisions." Wesley leaned forward, his expression turning more serious. "Clarissa, I'm concerned he's manipulating your emotions to serve his own purposes." "What purposes could he have?" "Think about it. He never married, never had a family of his own. He sees you now, a beautiful, accomplished woman, and suddenly all those old flames come rushing back. The job offer, the grand gestures, the hints that your marriage is somehow holding you back. It's all designed to make you question the life we've built together." Wesley's words were fluid and logical, designed to make Harrison look unstable and predatory rather than sincere. But after what I'd learned this afternoon, his manipulation tactics suddenly seemed so transparent. "What if he isn't manipulating me?" I asked quietly. "What if he's telling the truth?" Wesley's expression stiffened just a fraction. "The truth about what? About who you are? About what you're capable of?" I paused, gathering my courage. "About what actually happened to my medical school application." For a fleeting second, Wesley's carefully maintained composure cracked. Something flickered across his face. Surprise, perhaps, or fear. "Your medical school application was decades ago, Clarissa. Why are you bringing this up now?" "Because I found out something interesting today." I leaned forward, watching his face closely. "I found out I was accepted into the pediatric residency program at Children's Hospital, fully funded. They called me one of the most promising candidates they'd ever seen." Wesley didn't move. "That's impossible. You weren't accepted anywhere." "The acceptance letter was sent to our home address, the house you were in charge of collecting the mail at every day while I was finishing my final semester." The silence stretched between us, heavy with accusation and the weight of 40 years of lies. "Clarissa," Wesley finally said, his voice carefully controlled, "I think you're remembering it wrong." "I'm not remembering anything wrong." My voice was steady now, certain. "You intercepted those letters. You sabotaged my future. You convinced me my only option was to give up medicine and marry you." Wesley stood up abruptly and walked to the window overlooking our perfectly manicured backyard. "Even if that were true, and I'm not saying it is, it doesn't change the fact that you made a choice. You chose to marry me. You chose to build this life." "I made a choice based on false information. Information you deliberately withheld from me." He turned to face me. For the first time in our 40-year marriage, I saw him clearly. He wasn't a respected doctor or a protective husband, but a man who had built his own happiness on the ruins of someone else's dreams. "We have a good life, Clarissa," he said, but his voice lacked its usual certainty. "A beautiful home, financial security, social standing. Are you really going to throw all of that away for a fantasy of what might have been?" "It's not a fantasy," I said, standing to face him. "It's who I was meant to be." Wesley stared at me for a long time, and I could see him calculating, trying to find the right words to regain control of the situation. "Even if you could get this job," he finally said, "do you really think you could handle it? You haven't worked in a professional environment for 40 years. You'd be starting over at 62, competing with people half your age who have been building their careers while you were staying here." Every word was designed to undermine my self-confidence, to remind me of my limitations, to make me afraid of failure. But for the first time in 40 years, I didn't believe him. "Maybe I will fail," I said quietly. "But maybe I won't. And for the first time in my life, I think I'm worth the chance to find out." Wesley's face went pale, and I realized he was finally beginning to understand. The woman who had spent 40 years accepting his interpretation of reality was gone. Part 1 complete, Part 2 continues. Part 2. That night, I lay beside Wesley, but neither of us was sleeping. The space between us felt like an ocean, vast, cold, and unbridgeable. After my declaration in the study, he had tried to continue the conversation, but I had walked away. For the first time in our marriage, I had simply turned my back and left the room. Now, in the darkness, I could feel him watching me, calculating his next move. Wesley was never a man who accepted defeat easily, especially when it came to controlling the narrative of our shared life. "Clarissa," he finally said, his voice cutting through the silence, "we need to resolve this." I didn't respond. I wasn't ready to listen to any strategy he had designed to pull me back into compliance. "I know you're angry," he continued. "Perhaps you have a right to be. Perhaps I did make some decisions regarding your career without consulting you, but I was protecting you, protecting us." Protecting. The word defined our 40-year marriage. Wesley was the protector. I was the protected. He made the hard choices so I wouldn't have to face the harsh realities of the world. "Medical school would have been brutal for you," he said. His voice took on that reasonable, caring tone he used when he wanted to sound wise rather than controlling. The competition, the hours, the pressure, I saw what it did to people, how it destroyed relationships, how it consumed lives. I couldn't bear the thought of that happening to you. I turned over in the darkness to face him, watching his silhouette outlined by the moonlight filtering through the bedroom curtains. "That wasn't a choice for you to make for me," I said calmly. "Wasn't it? We were engaged. We were planning a life together. Isn't partnership about making decisions that are best for both of you, not just one?" The argument was crafted so perfectly, sounding so reasonable, that for a moment I almost believed it. That was Wesley's gift. He had the ability to make his selfishness sound like a sacrifice, to make his control look like a form of care. But I had spent the entire afternoon with the man who had known me when I was strong, when I was capable, when I believed I could change the world. Harrison's belief in who I used to be had awakened something inside me that Wesley's carefully constructed reality couldn't touch. What if I had succeeded? I asked. What if medical school had been challenging but not impossible? What if I had excelled? Wesley was silent for a long time. "But you might not have, and failure would have crushed you. So you ensured I never had the chance to find out. I ensured you never had to gamble everything on an uncertain outcome." His voice became softer, more intimate. "Clarissa, I love you. I wanted to build a life with you. Going to medical school would have delayed that by years, maybe even made it impossible. We would have been separated during residency, struggling financially, barely seeing each other. Is that really what you wanted?" The question hung between us, and I realized he was still doing it, still trying to convince me that his version of events was the only reasonable one, still trying to make me believe my dreams were just naive fantasies that would only lead to disappointment. But I remembered that young girl who had meticulously written notes in her medical textbooks, the girl who stayed up late studying because of a burning passion to heal. That girl wasn't naive. She was focused, determined, and capable of handling any challenge that came her way. "I'll never know what I wanted," I finally said, "because you didn't give me the chance to choose." Wesley sighed, a sound that carried what seemed like genuine regret. "Maybe you're right. Maybe I should have told you about the acceptance letter. Let you make the decision yourself. But Clarissa, that was 40 years ago. We can't change the past. We can only decide what to do about the future." "Yes," I agreed, "we can." Something in my tone must have warned him, because Wesley sat up slightly, trying to read my face in the dark. "What does that mean?" I took a deep breath, knowing that what I was about to say would irrevocably change everything between us. "It means I'm taking the job Harrison offered me." The silence that followed was so absolute I could hear the grandfather clock downstairs chiming midnight. "You can't be serious," Wesley finally said. "I am absolutely serious." Wesley switched on the bedside lamp, and the harsh light flooded our bedroom. His face was a mixture of disbelief and anger. The composure he so carefully maintained had finally crumbled. "Clarissa, you are 62 years old. You haven't worked outside this house in 40 years. You have no experience in hospital administration, no understanding of medical politics. You have no idea what you're facing. Then I'll learn. You'll embarrass yourself and me." His voice was rising now, losing the controlled tone he usually maintained. "Do you know what people will say? They'll say my wife is going through some midlife crisis, chasing an old flame, and trying to reclaim her lost youth like a fool." "Let them talk." Wesley stared at me as if I had turned into someone he didn't know. "This isn't you, Clarissa. This isn't who you are." "No," I said, sitting up to look him directly in the eye. "This is who I am. You just spent 40 years making sure I forgot it." Wesley got out of bed and paced between the window and the bed, his agitation palpable. "This is all because of him, isn't it? Because of Harrison Mitchell. He's manipulating you, using your emotions to get what he wants." "What does he want? Wesley, what could he possibly get out of offering me a job?" "Revenge," Wesley said immediately. "Revenge for me marrying you, for you choosing me over him. He wants to destroy our marriage as the price for losing you 40 years ago." The accusation was so absurd, so clearly a projection of Wesley's own manipulative personality onto Harrison, that I almost laughed. "Or," I said calmly, "he just believes I'm capable of doing the work based on a conversation from your college days? Based on a few minutes at a hospital gala?" Wesley's voice was becoming increasingly desperate. "Clarissa, successful people don't make $50 million decisions based on nostalgia. He must have an ulterior motive." "Maybe his ulterior motive is wanting to work with someone who shares his vision for pediatric care. Maybe he wants to give a talented person the opportunity they deserve. Maybe not everything is a conspiracy." Wesley stopped pacing and stared at me. "You really believe that, don't you? You really think you can walk into one of the most prestigious medical centers in the country and succeed in a high-level management role without any relevant experience?" "I don't know if I can succeed," I said honestly, "but I know I want to try. And if you fail, if you completely botch it, what then? Then I'll deal with the consequences like an adult." The statement hit the mark. Wesley flinched, realizing his own tendency to treat me like a child who couldn't handle difficult realities. "And what about us?" he finally asked, his voice now quiet. "What about our marriage?" It was the question I had been dreading, and one I didn't have a good answer for yet. "I don't know," I admitted, "but I know I can't live the way we have been living anymore. I can't pretend that being protected is the same as being loved." Wesley sat heavily on the edge of the bed, suddenly looking much older than his 67 years. "I do love you," he said softly. "Maybe I didn't always show it in the right way, but everything I did because I loved you." "I know you believe that," I said gently, "but love doesn't steal someone else's choices. Love doesn't require one person to disappear so the other can shine." We lapsed into a long silence, the weight of 40 years of accumulated misunderstandings settling between us. "So what happens now?" Wesley finally asked. "Now I call Harrison and tell him I accept his offer. I start my trial period and see if this is something I can actually do. And if I ask you not to, if I tell you it will destroy our marriage?" I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw not the respected doctor or the controlling husband, but a man genuinely afraid of losing the life he'd built. Then I can only say that if a marriage can't withstand one partner pursuing their own dreams, it wasn't a real marriage to begin with. Wesley's face twisted slightly, and for a moment I felt sorry for him. He was so accustomed to the power dynamic between us that he couldn't imagine a relationship where we were equals. "I need some air," I said, getting out of bed. "I'm going to sit in the garden for a while." Wesley made no move to stop me. As I left the bedroom, I could hear him calling someone, presumably his brother or a colleague, seeking advice on how to handle his suddenly rebellious wife. Outside, the October night was crisp and clear. I sat on the stone bench beneath the old oak tree and looked up at the stars, which somehow seemed brighter than they had in years. In my pocket, Harrison's private business card seemed to pulse with possibilities. I took out my phone, stared at his number for a long time, and finally typed out a text. "Harrison, I've made my decision. I would love to accept the position you offered. When can we start?" I pressed send before I could change my mind. Despite the late hour, his reply arrived within minutes. "Sarah, I'm thrilled. Can you meet me at the hospital at 9 a.m. tomorrow? I'll give you a tour of the new wing and introduce you to the key staff. This is going to be something great." I smiled, feeling something I hadn't felt in decades, anticipation for my future. "I'll be there," I replied. Just as I was putting my phone away, the French doors leading to the house opened, and Elena appeared in her robe and slippers. "Mrs. Hartwell," I heard voices. "Is everything all right?" Elena had her own small apartment above our garage, but she always protected me in ways that went beyond her job description. Over the years, I had suspected more than once that she stayed late or came early just to ensure I was okay. "Everything is fine, Elena. Actually, better than fine." I looked at her kind, worried face. "I got a job." Elena's eyes widened. "A job? What kind of job?" "At the hospital, working with the children and their families." Even saying it out loud felt surreal. Elena sat on the stone bench next to me, her expression shifting from worry to something like pride. "That is wonderful, Mrs. Hartwell. You will be very good at that job." "Do you really think so?" "I am sure of it. I have watched you for 15 years. The way you care for people, the way you solve problems, the way you make everyone around you better. Those children are lucky to have you." Her faith in me was unexpected but moved me deeply. "Thank you, Elena. That means more to me than you know." We sat together in a comfortable silence, watching the stars. Finally, Elena spoke again. "And Dr. Hartwell, is he happy for you in your new job?" I considered how to answer that honestly. "Dr. Hartwell is concerned about the changes in our daily life," I said finally. Elena nodded knowingly. "Change is hard for some people, especially when they are used to things staying a certain way." "Yes." "Well, you know what my grandmother used to say. She said a bird in a cage might feel safe, but it will never learn how to fly." Her words hit me with unexpected force. "Your grandmother sounds like a wise woman." "She was. And she would have loved you very much." Elena stood up and pulled her robe tighter against the chill. "Mrs. Hartwell, if you need anything for your new job, help with clothes or transportation, whatever it is, you just let me know." "Thank you, Elena, for everything." After Elena went inside, I stayed in the garden for another hour, planning my new life. Tomorrow I would tour the hospital, meet the people I'd be working with, and start to understand the scope of the work I was about to take on. The feeling was terrifying, but equally exhilarating. When I finally went back inside, Wesley was lying in bed with his back to me, pretending to be asleep. I dressed quietly in the bathroom, selecting my outfit for my hospital visit. A navy blue blazer and gray slacks, feeling professional but not too rigid. As I left the next morning, I found a note from Wesley on the kitchen counter. "Clarissa, I hope you'll reconsider this decision. We've built something beautiful together. Don't let a fantasy from the past destroy everything that's real." I carefully folded the note and put it in my purse, not as a keepsake, but as a reminder. For 40 years, Wesley had been telling me what was real and what was fantasy. He'd convinced me my dreams were naive, my abilities limited, and that my rightful place was in the shadow of his life. But as I drove to the hospital, toward Harrison, and toward the possibility of reclaiming who I once was, I realized the only fantasy was believing I was meant to live such a small life. At exactly 9 a.m., I walked through the front doors of St. Mary's Medical Center, wearing my navy blue blazer and carrying a leather portfolio I'd unearthed from the back of my closet. I felt nervous and unsure, but more alive than I had in decades. Harrison was waiting in the lobby, and his face lit up when he saw me. "Sarah," he said, stepping forward with a smile that made me feel like anything was possible. Welcome to your new life. 6 months later, I stood in my new office overlooking the pediatric wing, watching the morning sun pour through the windows that had been designed to bring in as much natural light as possible. The nameplate on my door read, Dr. Sarah Mitchell, Director of Family Advocacy Services, a name that still felt both foreign and entirely right every time I saw it. The transition hadn't been easy. The first few weeks had been a whirlwind of learning hospital systems, understanding insurance protocols, and navigating the complex personalities of medical professionals. At first, they had been skeptical of a doctor's wife who thought she could manage a department. But I proved them wrong. More importantly, I proved my own opinion of what I could do at 62 wrong. The Family Advocacy Center had become exactly what Harrison and I had envisioned. It was a place where frightened parents could find guidance, a place where a child facing long-term treatment could receive educational support, a place where families dealing with impossible medical decisions could find practical help and emotional support. Yesterday, I helped coordinate care for a 7-year-old girl with leukemia, whose family was struggling to manage treatment plans across 3 different hospitals. Last week, I worked with the social work team to arrange temporary housing for a family with premature twins who needed months of specialized care. This morning, I had a meeting with the Hospital Foundation to discuss expanding our family support programs. This was meaningful work that made a difference. This work utilized every skill I had cultivated over 40 years of managing complex situations, only now it was applied to a greater goal than maintaining Wesley's comfortable life. My phone buzzed. A text from Elena. In the tumultuous months since these changes, she had become more than just my housekeeper. She had become one of my closest confidants. How's the first day of the new life going? Remember to eat lunch. I smiled, replying quickly, exhilarating and terrifying. Lunch at 12:30, I promise. The divorce was finalized last week. Wesley had fought back at first, hiring an expensive lawyer and threatening how much it would cost me financially to leave. But Harrison had quietly helped me connect with a lawyer who specialized in cases where one spouse was financially controlled by the other. We built a strong case for alimony, arguing that for 40 years, I had supported Wesley's career at the expense of my own. The settlement was fair, enough to ensure my independence without destroying Wesley financially. More importantly, it gave me the freedom to discover who I was when I wasn't playing the role of Mrs. Wesley Hartwell. The woman I was discovering was someone I liked very much. A light knock on my office door interrupted my thoughts. "Come in," I called out. Harrison appeared in the doorway carrying 2 coffees, wearing the smile I'd become familiar with over the past few months. Proud, affectionate, but careful not to overstep boundaries I wasn't ready to grant yet. "Thought you might need some caffeine," he said, setting a coffee on my desk. "Department head meeting starts in 10 minutes. Right, the quarterly review." I gathered my notes, feeling that familiar tension before an important meeting. 6 months into the job, I no longer feared a catastrophic failure. But I could still feel the weight of responsibility for the families who depended on our services. "How are you feeling about presenting the expansion proposal?" Harrison asked, sitting in the chair across from my desk. "Terrified," I admitted, "but excited too. The data is compelling. We've reduced the average length of stay by 18%, improved patient satisfaction scores across all pediatric departments, and the family support program already has a waiting list. All of which proves what I knew from the start," Harrison said quietly. "You were born to do this work." Our eyes met across the desk, and I felt that familiar warmth growing between us. It wasn't the desperate passion of our 20s, but something deeper. A connection built on mutual respect, shared purpose, and the rare gift of being truly seen by another person. We were both careful not to rush into any romantic relationship. We both understood that I needed time to discover who I was outside of a marriage before I could consider entering a new one. But there was an understanding between us, an acknowledgement, that when I was ready, something beautiful might happen. "I should probably get to my meeting," I said, standing up and smoothing my dress. A bespoke black professional suit that made me feel both professional and confident. "Sarah," Harrison said as I reached the door, "whatever happens in there, remember that you've exceeded everyone's wildest expectations, including my own." The department head meeting went better than I dared to hope. Dr. Patricia Lennox, who had initially been one of my harshest critics, actually praised the efficiency of our new family coordination protocol. the chief of staff unanimously approved my expansion proposal with an extra $200,000 earmarked for new staff positions and extended hours. As I walked back to my office afterward, I passed the gallery of portraits lining the hospital's main corridor. Photos of distinguished doctors, generous benefactors, and innovative researchers who had shaped the institution's history. One day I realized my own photo might hang there, not as someone's wife, but as Dr. Sarah Mitchell, the woman who had revolutionized family-centered pediatric care. The thought should have seemed arrogant, but instead it felt like the natural progression of the life I was building. As I reached my office, my phone rang. Wesley's name appeared on the screen, and I hesitated before answering. Since the divorce was finalized, we'd only spoken a few times, briefly and politely discussing the division of household items and closing joint accounts. "Hello, Wesley." "Clarissa." He still used the name he'd chosen for me, unable or unwilling to accept my reversion to Sarah. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything important." "I have a few minutes. What is it?" Pause. "I'm calling to congratulate you. Actually, I heard about your expansion proposal being approved. Patricia Lennox mentioned it at a medical conference." I was surprised by the genuine warmth in his voice. "Thank you. That's very unexpected." "I know our separation didn't happen under the best of circumstances," Wesley continued, "and I know I made mistakes in our marriage, big ones, but seeing what you've accomplished in these last 6 months, I'm proud of you, Clarissa. Truly." The admission caught me off guard. It was the closest Wesley had ever come to admitting he'd been wrong about my capabilities. "I appreciate that, Wesley. I know it hasn't been easy for either of us." "No, it hasn't." Another pause. "Anyway, I think I finally understand why you had to leave. I spent 40 years trying to protect you from failure, but I never gave you the chance to succeed." The insight exceeded my expectations of him, a level of self-awareness that suggested real growth. "We both did the best we knew how to do at the time," I said gently. "I don't regret our marriage, Wesley, but I won't regret leaving it either." I hope you're happy, truly happy." "I am. For the first time in a very, very long time, I am truly happy." After hanging up, I sat in my office for a long time, looking out at the children's garden that Harrison had included in his original design. Families moved through that space, parents pushing strollers, siblings playing on specially designed equipment, teenagers sitting together on benches, all of them dealing with the stress of having a sick child, but finding moments of normalcy in that carefully created space. This is what I did now. I created space, literally and metaphorically, so that healing happened not just in the patient, but in the entire family. A knock on the door brought me back to reality. "Come in." Harrison appeared again, but this time his expression was different. Excited, almost a little nervous. "Do you have dinner plans tonight?" he asked. "Nothing special, why?" "Because I have something I want to show you, something I've been working on for a while." My curiosity was piqued, and I agreed to meet him at 7 p.m. at an address he wrote on a slip of paper. It was in the Arts District, not far from the cafe where we'd had our first conversation 6 months ago. That night, I drove through the leafy streets of the Arts District, past galleries, independent shops, and restaurants packed with people who looked like they'd chosen their own paths. When I reached the address Harrison had given me, I found myself standing in front of a beautifully restored Victorian house with a small brass plaque next to the front door. Harrison was waiting on the front porch. His expression was a mix of excitement and something that looked like vulnerability. "What is this place?" I asked as I walked up the steps to meet him. "Read the plaque," he said softly. I looked down at the brass nameplate. "The Sarah Thompson Medical Education Foundation, providing scholarships for students pursuing a career in pediatric medicine." I stared at the plaque, struggling to absorb what I was seeing. "Harrison, what have you done?" "I started a foundation in your name, your real name." His words poured out, seemingly rehearsed 1,000 times. "It will provide full scholarships to students who want to specialize in pediatric medicine but can't afford medical school, especially students from underserved communities, first-generation college graduates, the people who might never have had a chance otherwise." I felt tears prickling in my eyes. "You used my maiden name." "Because that was the name you had when you inspired me to believe medicine could change the world. Sarah Thompson, the brilliant student who believed healing required not just scientific excellence, but deep compassion." He opened the front door, revealing a gorgeous interior that had been converted into offices and meeting spaces. The walls were filled with photos of medical students, scholarship recipients, and young doctors who were already contributing to the field of pediatric care. The foundation has already funded 12 full scholarships, Harrison continued, his voice growing firmer. 4 of those students have already finished their residency training and are now working in pediatric care in rural communities that desperately needed them. I walked through the space in awe, reading the stories of these young people whose lives had been changed by an educational opportunity they could never have afforded on their own. These were kids like me, bright, passionate, determined, but without the financial resources to pursue their dreams. Harrison, this is incredible, but why use my name? Why not your own? He was silent for a long time, watching me explore the space. Because you taught me something I never forgot, even in those 40 years when I thought I'd lost you forever. What was that? The best way to honor the gifts we've been given is to ensure others get the same opportunity. His voice grew softer, and because I wanted to create something that would last long after we're both gone, something that would keep your spirit alive in the cause you cared about most. I turned to face him, tears now flowing freely. This is the most beautiful thing anyone has ever done for me. Sarah, Harrison stepped forward. I need to tell you something I should have said months ago. My heart began to race, sensing that we were approaching a moment that would change everything between us. What is it? I love you. Not the 22-year-old student I loved in medical school, not some idealized memory of your past. I love the person you are now, strong, compassionate, brilliant, and brave enough to rebuild her entire life at 62. His voice was steady, certain. I love the way you fight for those families who can't fight for themselves. I love the way you've transformed your own painful experiences into the wisdom to help others heal. The words hung between us. Beautiful, terrifying, and exactly what I'd been hoping to hear for months, yet hadn't dared to hope for. I love you too, I said, the admission feeling both surprising and inevitable. I think I started falling in love with you all over again the moment you called me Sarah at that gala. You were the first person in 40 years to see me for who I really was, instead of who everyone else wanted me to be. Harrison reached out and took my hand, pulling me gently. So what happens now? I smiled, feeling lighter and more hopeful than I had since I was 22. Now, we get to discover what we can build together, when both people are finally able to be themselves. He kissed me. The kiss was soft, sweet, and full of possibility. It was a kiss that tasted like a second chance, like a dream delayed but not destroyed, like the promise of a future that both of us had once been afraid to imagine. When we finally pulled apart, I looked around the foundation office again, looking at the photos of those young doctors, the mission statement on the wall, and the physical embodiment of Harrison's belief in the person I was always meant to be. I want to add one more thing to the foundation, I said. What is it? A mentorship program that pairs scholarship recipients with senior doctors who can guide them through medical school and residency training. These mentors can help them navigate the challenges and keep their why, the reason they wanted to become doctors in the first place, at the forefront of their minds. Harrison's face lit up. Perfect. Do you have someone in mind to lead that program? I smiled, feeling the last few pieces of my new life fall into place. Actually, I think I know the perfect person. That night, as we left the foundation and walked hand in hand down the leafy streets, I realized that my story wasn't about revenge or dramatic confrontations. It was something quieter, but more powerful. It was the story of a woman who spent 40 years believing she was meant to live a small life, only to discover it's never too late to remember who you truly are. Now, I'm curious about you, listening to my story. If you were in my position, what would you have done? Have you ever experienced something similar? Comment below. Also, I'm leaving 2 more of the most popular stories from the channel on the end screen, and they will absolutely surprise you. Thank you for watching to the end. Get out of my boardroom. You're senile. My son spat at me in front of investors. I was in my 60s at the time. I looked at his $50 billion merger deal and simply said, "Have fun." The next day, the bankers burst into the office, pale-faced. "You idiot. Your mother owns the 51% majority. She just vetoed the deal and fired the entire board." My son froze. "I'm glad you're here. Please follow my story until the end and leave your city in the comments so I can know how far my story has traveled. I never imagined that the boardroom I helped design would become the stage for my public execution." The mahogany table stretched out before me like a battlefield, the polished surface reflecting the harsh fluorescent lights overhead. For 23 years, I'd sat in meetings in this room. But today felt entirely different. The hum of the AC was louder than usual. Perhaps it was just my nerves, magnifying everything. The scent of coffee, usually so comforting, now made me nauseous. Keith stood at the head of the table. My son, the CEO of Sterling Solutions, the company I had built from the ground up in my own garage 43 years ago. At 41, he commanded the room with the kind of confidence I had once been proud of. His expensive navy suit fit perfectly, his hair groomed to perfection. Every inch the successful executive. But the way he looked at me today made my chest tighten. "Gentlemen," Keith announced to the room full of investors and board members, his voice carrying the authority I had once taught him. "Before we proceed to the final details of the $50 billion merger with Morrison Industries, I need to handle an unpleasant situation." Keith never truly owned this company. He acted as CEO, convinced he held the majority stake, but he was mistaken. Legally, ever since Thomas passed away 18 years ago, the controlling interest has been mine. I stared at the documents, the black ink blurring through my tear-filled eyes. These weren't tears of grief, but something I hadn't felt in years. Hope. Why did Thomas keep this from me? Margaret's expression softened. He was fading, Renee. He trusted that when the time was right, you would figure it out yourself. He also hoped that day would never come. He wanted Keith to grow into a leader worthy of the legacy you built together. I thought back to the humiliations of yesterday, Keith's plans to sell my home, and those emails discussing guardianship. That day has arrived. It certainly has. Margaret pulled out another file. There is more. The trust also grants you veto power over any major corporate decision, mergers, acquisitions, changes to employee benefits, or executive compensation exceeding $2 million annually. All of these require your written approval. My hand trembled as I reached for the paper. There it was in black and white. The $50 billion Morrison merger required the trustee's authorization. Without my signature, Keith's was worthless. "Margaret, the merger is scheduled to close tomorrow. Keith believes it is a done deal." "Is that so?" she asked, her tone remaining professionally neutral. I thought of the employees who would lose their pensions, of Janet, who had worked for us for 15 years and believed her retirement was secure. I thought of Henry, Maria, and dozens of others who trusted me to protect what we had built together. "No," I said firmly, "it is not done." Margaret nodded in approval. "Then we need to move quickly. I need to file the appropriate documents with the SEC to formalize your status as trustee and notify Morrison Industries that the merger requires additional approval. That should buy us some time. How soon will Keith find out?" "Likely this afternoon. Once the Morrison legal team receives our filings, they will contact Sterling's attorneys immediately." A beautiful sense of anticipation settled in my chest. Yesterday, Keith spent the entire day treating me like a senile grandmother who couldn't grasp basic business concepts. Today, he would discover that his mother held all the cards. "There is one more thing," Margaret said, handing me a sealed envelope bearing Thomas's distinct handwriting. "He asked me to give this to you when you activated the trust." My fingers shook as I opened the envelope. Inside was a letter written in Thomas's neat script. "My dearest Renee, if you are reading this, it means Keith has forced your hand. I am sorry it came to this. I had hoped our son would grow into a man worthy of your sacrifices. But I also knew that might not happen. You gave up so much to build our company and raise our children. You missed parties, vacations, and quiet nights because you were fighting for our family's future. Keith will never understand those sacrifices because I ensured he never had to experience them. Perhaps that was my fault. But now, it is time to fight for yourself. Use this power not just to protect the company, but to reclaim your life. You are not too old, too tired, or too weak to manage what you created. Believe in yourself, my love. You were always the stronger one, always yours, Thomas." I read the letter twice, tears streaming down my face. Thomas knew all along. Somehow he foresaw this day and gave me the tools I needed to endure it. "Renee," Margaret whispered, "what would you like to do?" I wiped my tears and looked at her with determination. "I am going to the office. When Keith gets the news, I want to be there. From a legal standpoint, that might not be the best idea. It could look like an ambush." "I am not ambushing him," I said, standing up with a surge of strength I hadn't felt in months. "I am reminding him that his mother is not the helpless old woman he imagines." Margaret organized the documents into a neat stack. I will have a courier deliver copies to Keith's office within the hour, along with a formal notice stating that all merger discussions must involve the trustee. I will also prepare a board resolution acknowledging your power as the majority shareholder. And Margaret, I want a full audit of every decision Keith has made over the past year, every contract, every personnel change, every expense over $10,000. Her eyes sparkled with professional satisfaction, looking for evidence of mismanagement? Looking for evidence that my son forgot that running a company is no child's play. 2 hours later, I sat in my car outside the Sterling Solutions building, watching employees hurry in and out through the glass doors. These people had trusted me to build a business that could provide for their families. Keith, in his pursuit of glory, was willing to sacrifice their security. My phone rang. It was Janet. "Mrs. Sterling, you should know that Mr. Keith just received some legal papers. He has been shouting at Roger and Frank for the last 20 minutes. You can hear it throughout the whole office." "What is he saying?" "Something about it being impossible and completely illegal." "Mrs. Sterling, what exactly did you do?" I smiled, watching a young woman struggle toward the building with an armful of files. 20 years ago, that was me. Working too hard, dreaming too big, and believing that effort and intelligence could overcome any obstacle. I simply reminded my son that everything he knows about business, he learned from his mother, I said. But clearly, I didn't teach him everything I know. "Should I tell him you are here?" "No, Janet, let him figure it out himself. He has always been such a bright boy. I am sure he will eventually piece it together." I hung up and leaned back, feeling lighter than I had in years. Tomorrow, the Morrison merger will be officially dead. Keith will have to pay the price for treating his mother like she was senile, and I will finally reclaim everything that has always been mine. The girl with the files had safely entered the building. Through the glass, I could see Keith pacing in his corner office, waving his arms wildly at Roger and Frank. His face was flushed with anger and confusion. He is about to learn that underestimating your mother is a mistake you only get to make once. I hadn't intended to go in, but when I saw Frank Morrison's black sedan screech into the parking lot, I knew I couldn't miss this. Frank climbed out looking like a prisoner heading for the gallows. His usually perfect hair was a mess, and his tie was crooked. Behind him were 2 other men in expensive suits, the legal team from Morrison Industries, no doubt. They looked pale and stiff, barely containing their panic. This was going to be better than I imagined. I followed them inside, keeping a respectful distance. When I approached, Janet at the front desk stared at me wide-eyed. "Mrs. Sterling, I don't think you should—" "It is all right, Janet," I said calmly. "I have every right to be in my own building." Taking the elevator to the 32nd floor felt different today. Gone was the shame and heartbreak that had crushed me yesterday. Instead, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Anticipation. The woman reflected in the polished steel doors looked calm, collected, and perhaps even a little dangerous. The hallway buzzed with nervous energy. Employees huddled in small groups, whispering anxiously. They scattered when they saw me, offering polite nods and confused smiles. News had obviously spread that something major was happening, but no one understood what. I could hear Keith's voice before I even reached his office, loud and growing frantic. The door was open and I could see Frank pacing by the window while Keith sat behind his desk. Files were scattered across the desk like debris after an explosion. "This is impossible," Keith said, his voice tight with disbelief. "My mother has no legal authority over the merger decision. She is not even on the board anymore." Frank stopped pacing and turned to face him. "Keith, I don't care about your family dynamics. I care that Morrison Industries just received formal notice that this merger requires approval from the Sterling Family Trust, and your mother is the sole trustee with veto power. This is ridiculous. I own 60% of this company." Roger, sitting in a leather chair, nervously cleared his throat. "Actually, Keith, according to these documents, you own 49%. The rest belongs to the family trust your father established before he passed." The color drained from Keith's face. "That is impossible. I have seen the company filings. I know exactly what I own." One of the Morrison attorneys stepped forward, checking his tablet. "Mr. Sterling, I am afraid the filings you have been reviewing only show your personal share, not the full ownership structure. The trust shares were never transferred to your name." Keith stood up abruptly, knocking over his coffee cup. Dark liquid spread across the desk, staining the merger agreement. "Get Margaret Davidson on the phone immediately." "I have already spoken with Ms. Davidson," Frank said coldly. "She confirmed that Mrs. Renee Sterling has full discretionary power over all trust assets and decisions. The merger cannot proceed without her written approval." Then get my mother on the phone. Keith, Roger said cautiously, after the board meeting yesterday, I am not sure she would be willing to take your call. Just then, Keith noticed me standing in the doorway. A whirlwind of expressions crossed his face: surprise, confusion, and finally, something that might have been fear. Mother, he began, his voice carefully controlled. I was just about to call you. There seems to be some misunderstanding regarding our company's structure. I entered the office, walking slowly, savoring the moment. Frank and his attorneys watched me like I was a dangerous animal ready to strike. Roger shifted uncomfortably in his chair, likely recalling his smug confidence from yesterday. There is no misunderstanding, Keith, I said pleasantly. Just some information you never bothered to learn. Mother, we need to discuss this in private. Oh, I think we are well past the stage of needing to discuss this in private, I replied, sitting down in the chair across from his desk. After all, you didn't seem to have any trouble discussing my alleged incompetence in front of these gentlemen yesterday. Frank stepped forward, looking somewhat desperate. Mrs. Sterling, I believe we can resolve this misunderstanding. Perhaps we can discuss modifying the terms of the merger. There will be no merger, I said flatly. The room fell into a dead silence, save for the hum of the air conditioning. Keith's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. You cannot do this, he finally managed to say. This deal is worth $50 billion. It is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. For whom? I asked. Certainly not for the 400 employees who would lose their pension benefits, nor for the families who rely on our profit-sharing program. Those are just minor details that can be negotiated. I laughed, the sound sharp enough to make Roger flinch. Minor details? Keith, these people built this company alongside me. Their families are far more important than your bonus structure. Keith's composure finally collapsed. You are being too emotional, too irrational. That is why I said you no longer possess the capability to make strategic decisions. Emotional, I repeated slowly. Are we now calling protecting employees emotional? Frank tried to interject again. Mrs. Sterling, perhaps if we could adjust the terms to address your concerns about employee benefits. Mr. Morrison, I said, turning to face him directly. Your company's track record says everything. You have made 3 acquisitions in the last 5 years, and each time you eliminated employee benefits within 18 months. Why would this time be any different? His face turned bright red. Those were necessary restructuring decisions. Then my decision is also necessary. The answer is no. Keith slammed his hand on the table, sending files flying. You cannot destroy everything I have worked for just because you are upset about a board meeting. A board meeting? I stood up, feeling my own anger rising. Keith, yesterday you called me senile in front of a room full of people. You ordered me out of my own boardroom. You treated me like a senile old woman who couldn't understand basic business concepts. I was trying to protect you from... From what? From participating in the company's decisions? This company is something I built. It is the company I sacrificed 40 years of my life to create. Roger tried to intervene. Mrs. Sterling, perhaps we can arrange another meeting when things are less emotionally charged. Emotionally charged? I said, my voice dangerously low. Mr. Whitman, you sat in that chair yesterday and smiled while my son humiliated me. You said it was a relief to be able to handle the old woman problem efficiently. Did you think I wouldn't find out? Roger's face went white. Keith looked back and forth between me and Roger, confusion replacing his anger. Keith, I continued, I know about the emails, the guardianship discussion, the plan to sell my house, and the assisted living facilities you have already investigated. How could you? He started, but stopped. It was too late. How could I know? Because unlike you, I still have friends at this company, people who remember what the word loyalty means. Frank made one last desperate attempt. Mrs. Sterling, if we could. Mr. Morrison, I interrupted, I suggest that you and your team leave now. The merger is dead. It cannot be revived. Keith, see them out. Frank's attorneys were already packing their briefcases. The merger they had spent months negotiating had crumbled in a few sentences from a woman they had once deemed irrelevant. This is not over, Frank said as he walked toward the door. No, I replied calmly, it is over. After the Morrison team left, silence descended upon the office. Keith slumped in his chair, staring at the coffee-stained merger documents. Roger had already slipped away, likely to update his resume. Mother, Keith said softly, we need to talk. Now you want to talk? I mocked. Yesterday you wanted security to escort me out. I was protecting the company's interests. No, Keith, you were protecting your own interests. There is a difference. I walked toward the door, then paused. Oh, and Keith, There will be a board meeting tomorrow morning to discuss changes in the company's senior management. I suggest you prepare accordingly. He looked up sharply. What changes? I offered the same calm smile I had worn when I left the boardroom the day before. The kind of changes that happen when you underestimate your mother. I walked out of his office, down the hallway I had walked thousands of times, past employees who looked at me with newfound respect and curiosity. This time, I didn't leave in humiliation. I walked out as who I had always been, the true owner of Sterling Solutions. The elevator doors closed, and I saw my reflection again. The same silver hair, the same navy suit. But the woman looking back at me was different. She was stronger, vindicated. Tomorrow, Keith will learn the consequences of betraying the person who gave him everything, and I will finally reclaim everything that has always been mine. That Thursday morning, the boardroom of Sterling Solutions never felt more like it belonged to me. I arrived before 8 and reclaimed the mahogany chair at the head of the table, the very chair Keith had kicked me out of 2 days earlier. Morning sunlight poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. For a moment, I remembered our first board meeting when we moved into this room, when Keith was still in college, and the company's valuation was a fraction of what it is now. Janet had prepared everything exactly as I asked: fresh coffee in silver pots, copies of the trust documents at every seat, and a stack of audit reports that would prove to be extremely interesting. She had also done something I hadn't requested. She placed a single red rose, Thomas's favorite flower, next to my water glass. "To give you courage," she whispered as she brought it in. Margaret sat on my right, her briefcase open, documents organized with the precision of a lawyer who had been winning cases for 40 years. She looked like a general preparing for battle, which I suppose she was. "Are you ready?" she asked softly. I gently touched the rose petals. "I have been ready for 18 years. I just didn't know it myself." The board members arrived promptly at 9. Roger was the first to walk in, looking like he hadn't slept a wink. His usually perfect silver hair was disheveled, and his tie hung loosely around his neck. He stopped dead in his tracks when he saw me sitting at the head of the table. "Renee," he said cautiously, "I didn't expect you to attend this meeting." "Yes," I replied pleasantly, "I suppose you didn't." David Chen, who replaced Frank Morrison, arrived next. Unlike Frank, David knew how to read the room and knew to look nervous. Morrison Industries had scrambled to send someone to salvage their reputation after yesterday's disaster, but we all knew there was nothing left to save. Keith arrived last, and the change in him was shocking. The confident executive who had humiliated me 2 days ago was gone. His expensive suit couldn't hide his slumped shoulders, and his eyes were hollow, like a man who had spent the whole night realizing his entire world had collapsed beneath him. He took the seat opposite me, the position usually reserved for visiting executives, not the CEO. Everyone in the room knew what that meant. "Good morning, everyone," I began, my voice carrying easily across the room. "Thank you for attending this emergency board meeting. I know this is highly unusual, but recent events have made it necessary." Roger cleared his throat. "Renee, before we begin, I think we should address the elephant in the room. The Morrison merger is dead. Permanently dead," I added. "Mr. Chen, I trust your company has been notified." David Chen nodded reluctantly. "Mrs. Sterling, Morrison Industries is prepared to discuss alternatives." "There will be no alternatives, Mr. Chen. Your company's record regarding employee benefits makes any partnership impossible. You may excuse yourself." Chen gathered his files with obvious frustration. "This decision will cost Sterling Solutions a multi-billion-dollar opportunity." "Mr. Chen," I said, standing slowly, "you weren't even born when I was making business decisions. I think I can handle the consequences." After he left, the boardroom fell into an uneasy silence. Keith stared at his hands, while Roger fidgeted with his pen like a nervous schoolboy. "So," I continued, settling back into my chair, "let us discuss the real purpose of this meeting." Margaret stood up and began distributing copies of the audit report. Over the past 18 months, this company has made some questionable decisions under Keith Sterling's leadership. These documents are very enlightening. Keith looked up sharply. "What audit? I never authorized any audit." "You didn't need to," I replied calmly. "As the majority shareholder and trustee of the Sterling Family Trust, I authorized it. Just as I authorized the review of your compensation package, your expense accounts, and your decision-making process." Roger opened his report, and I watched his face go pale as he read the first page. Keith reached for his own copy with trembling hands. "A few highlights," Margaret continued in her crisp, professional tone. In the past 18 months, executive compensation has increased by 300%. Contributions to employee benefits have been reduced by 25%. Profit-sharing payouts have been delayed by an average of 90 days. And my personal favorite, a company retreat held in Aspen that cost $400,000 for 12 executives. Keith's voice was barely a whisper. Those were standard business expenses. Standard? I laughed, the sound echoing against the windows. Keith, I built this company by staying in budget hotels and flying coach. You spent more money on wine at that Aspen retreat than we have given the entire staff in annual bonuses in the past. The business environment is different now. No, you are different, I interrupted. The boy I raised knew the value of money because he watched me work 3 jobs to make ends meet. The man sitting across from me has forgotten where he came from. Roger tried to regain control. Renee, I think we are letting emotions cloud our judgment. Keith has increased the company's profits. By slashing employee benefits and inflating his own salary, I finished. Roger, do you know that Keith's current annual salary is higher than the total salary expenditure of our entire finance department? The silence that followed was deafening. Margaret produced another document. And there is more. Keith Sterling has been in discussions with 3 other merger candidates, all of which would lead to massive layoffs. The proposal from the Branson Group would eliminate 40% of existing positions. The offer from Hartwell Industries would move operations overseas. Keith finally found his voice. Those were just preliminary discussions, intended only for exploration. Exploration, I repeated, as if tasting something bitter. Keith, did you intend to explore these options before or after you declared me incapacitated? His face flushed red. That is not at all what— Roger, I turned to him, looking him straight in the eye. Would you like to read the email you sent to Keith on October 15th? The one regarding guardianship options? Roger's pen slipped from his weak fingers. Renee, that was taken out of context. Taken out of context? I stood up, feeling my full authority for the first time in years. The context is that you and my son were discussing declaring me mentally unfit so you could push your plans forward without interference. The context is that you laughed when Keith called me senile. The context is that both of you forgot that I am not some senile old woman who can be brushed aside. Keith made one last attempt. Mother, please, we can work this out. Families should stick together. The word family hung in the air like an accusation. Family, I said slowly. Keith, did you think of family when you planned to sell my house? Was it out of loyalty to family when you investigated nursing homes behind my back? Is that how family members treat each other when you humiliate me in front of a room full of strangers? Tears were streaming down his cheeks now, but I didn't feel a shred of sympathy. The time for sympathy passed when he chose greed over gratitude. Here is what happens next, I announced to the room. Effective immediately, I am resuming my role as CEO of Sterling Solutions. Keith Sterling is being removed from all positions within the company. You cannot do that, Roger protested. Keith has a contract. Keith's contract contains a clause regarding actions detrimental to the company, Margaret seamlessly added. Attempting to declare the majority shareholder incapacitated absolutely falls under that clause. I turned to Roger. Mr. Whitman, your services are no longer needed either. A replacement will be announced within the week. Roger roared in anger. This is insanity. At your age, you cannot manage this company. You don't understand modern business practices. Roger, I said, my voice deathly quiet, I understand business practices very well. What I don't understand is how you forgot that I was successfully managing this company long before you graduated from law school. Keith suddenly stood up, knocking over his chair. This is my life's work. You cannot just take it away. Your life's work? The words came out sharper than I expected. Keith, the year I gave birth to you was the same year I registered this company. I nursed you while reviewing contracts. I taught you how to walk in the hallway outside my first real office. This company is not your life's work. It is mine. You were just borrowing it. He looked at me as if I were a stranger, and perhaps I truly was. For too long I had played the role of the submissive mother, the founder who stepped aside. He had never truly seen the woman who fought tooth and nail to build something from nothing. Security will escort both of you out, I continued. Your personal belongings will be packed and sent to you. Your company credit cards are deactivated from this moment on. Your access passwords have been changed. Margaret handed Keith a thick envelope. Severance pay, standard terms, with no retaliatory deductions. Mrs. Sterling is being far more generous than the current situation warrants. Keith accepted the envelope with trembling hands. "Mother, please don't do this. I apologize for what I said. I was wrong about the merger. We can fix this." For a moment, looking at his tear-stained face, I almost wavered. This was, after all, my son, the boy I had raised, loved, and sacrificed for. But I immediately remembered the emails about guardianship, the plans to sell my house, and the total lack of respect he had displayed, not just for me, but his cold-hearted disregard for every employee whose life he was willing to sacrifice for his own gain. "Keith," I said gently, "some mistakes cannot be fixed. Some trust, once broken, cannot be repaired. You made your choices, and now you must face the consequences." Margaret signaled, and security arrived. Two professionals in dark suits handled the situation with appropriate caution. Keith walked out on his own, his shoulders shaking with anger or sadness. Roger followed behind, still muttering about lawsuits and wrongful termination. When Margaret and I were the only ones left in the boardroom, I collapsed into my chair, suddenly feeling a wave of exhaustion. "How does it feel?" Margaret asked. I looked around this room where I had been humiliated, where I had been dismissed, this room where I had just reclaimed everything that was always mine. It feels like I can finally breathe again. 6 months later, I stood in the same boardroom where my son had called me senile, but everything had changed. Morning sunlight streamed through windows that had been professionally cleaned for the first time in years, casting a warm light across the mahogany table where 8 new board members were reviewing quarterly reports. This time, these were real reports, not the kind Keith had used to whitewash the company. These numbers showed that the company hadn't just survived, it was thriving. Employee satisfaction has risen by 37% since January, reported Janet in her new role as Human Resources Director. At 58, she finally received the promotion she should have gotten years ago. The restored profit-sharing plan and pension contributions have been incredibly well received. Henry Morrison, our new CFO, thankfully he is not related to Frank Morrison, nodded in approval. The financial impact is minimal. The increase in employee productivity is sufficient to offset the increased benefit costs. I smiled, remembering how Keith had insisted these plans were unnecessary luxuries. Funny how treating employees well actually improves business performance. Who could have predicted that? "How is the partnership with Hartwell progressing?" asked Sarah Chen, the youngest member of our board at 34. After discovering that Keith had been ignoring her innovative market research for months, I promoted her from senior analyst. "It is proceeding on schedule," I replied, "but unlike Keith's approach, we have maintained full employment. No layoffs, no benefit cuts." Hartwell was a bit resistant at first, but when I explained that our employees are our most valuable asset, they understood. The irony was clear. Keith had been so obsessed with finding a buyer for the company that he never considered strengthening our foundation through selective partnerships rather than tearing it apart. After the meeting, I retreated to my office, the corner office Keith had previously occupied. In reality, I had moved back into the space I had used for 20 years before making room for my son. The view overlooking the city skyline was spectacular, but my favorite part was the framed photo on my desk. It was a picture of Thomas and me at our wedding, young, full of hope, and ready to conquer the world together. The intercom buzzed. "Mrs. Sterling," came Janet's voice, "you have a visitor. He does not have an appointment." But I didn't have to ask who it was. I had been waiting for this visit for weeks. Keith sat across from my desk, looking much older than his 41 years. His expensive suit had been replaced by khakis and a button-down shirt. His hair was longer, no longer groomed to perfection. The arrogant confidence that had once defined him was gone. "Hello, Mother," he said softly. "Keith," I kept my voice neutral and professional. "I hear you have found a new position." He nodded. "Regional sales manager at Brennan Industries. It is very different from what I am used to." Brennan Industries was a mid-sized company, and the pay was about a quarter of what Keith had earned at Sterling Solutions. No expense account, no company car, no executive perks, just a job in exchange for honest labor. "How are you adjusting?" He smiled, but there was no humor in it. "My new boss is 26. She has an MBA from a state university, and she calls me Keith, not Mr. Sterling. Yesterday, she asked me to organize the storage room because she said I needed to understand every aspect of the business. And did you organize the storage room?" He was surprised by the question. "Yes. It took 3 hours, and I even discovered thousands of dollars in inventory tracking errors. It turns out that understanding the details is actually valuable." I nodded in approval, Your father used to say that a good executive must have the ability to perform any job in the company when necessary. I never listened to those stories, Keith admitted. I thought they were just old-fashioned nonsense. We sat in silence for a while. Through the window, I could see people on the street below rushing to meetings, clutching coffee, living their busy lives. 6 months ago, I was one of them, rushing through the building that housed the company I had built with my own hands. In this building, my own boardroom was no longer welcoming to me. I came to apologize. Keith finally spoke, not to get my job back, not to make excuses, just to say I am sorry. What specifically are you apologizing for? Facing the direct question, he flinched. For calling you senile. For treating you like you were incompetent. For planning to have you declared incapacitated. His voice choked on the last few words. And for forgetting all the sacrifices you made to build this company. For taking your love for granted. For being so focused on my own ambition that I forgot what was truly important. I examined his face, looking for signs of manipulation or self-pity. But Keith was never a skilled liar. What I saw was genuine remorse. I have been seeing a therapist, he continued. Dr. Williams downtown. She has been helping me analyze how I could become a person who could treat his own mother so cruelly. And what have you learned? He took a deep breath, his voice trembling. That success without character is just an expensive failure. That you cannot build anything lasting on a foundation of selfishness and disrespect. That I spent so many years trying to prove I was worthy of the legacy you built, but forgot to prove I was worthy of you as a person. These were the words I had been longing to hear for months. But they couldn't erase the damage that had been done. The trust between us had been shattered, and once trust is broken, it is almost impossible to rebuild. Keith, I said gently, I am glad you are seeking help. I am glad you are starting to see things differently. But an apology cannot undo the choices you made. I know, tears streamed down his cheeks. I know I cannot fix this. I just needed you to know that I finally understand what I lost. Not just the company, the money, or the position. I lost you. I lost the respect of the person whose opinion meant the most to me. I opened my desk drawer and took out a small wrapped package. I intended to have this sent to your apartment, but since you are here, Keith carefully unwrapped the package. Inside was a photo of him at his college graduation. He was wearing his cap and gown. I was standing next to him, my face radiant with pride. We looked so happy. We looked like a family. I wanted to give this to you, I said, not because I have forgiven everything, but because I want you to remember who you were before ambition and greed changed you. He held the photo tightly, as if it were made of glass. Do you think there is a possibility that we could rebuild our relationship one day? The question I had always feared being asked, the question I had been asking myself for months. I don't know, I answered honestly. For now, I need time to heal from what happened, and you need time to prove that the changes you are making are real, not just a temporary expediency. Keith nodded, wiping away tears. If I could do it over again. But you cannot, I said firmly. None of us can. We can only look forward and try to do better. He stood up to leave and paused at the door. Mother, for what it is worth, the company looks amazing. Everything you have done over the past 6 months, the employee programs, the new partnerships, the growth strategy, is absolutely brilliant. Dad would be so proud. After he left, I sat alone in my office, afternoon sunlight casting long shadows across the thick carpet. The photo he had returned to me sat on my desk next to a picture of Thomas and me. 2 very different versions of happiness, separated by decades of choices and consequences. My computer chimed, indicating a new email. It was from Sarah Chen, confirming that the partnership with Peterson Industries was finalized. This was yet another company that wanted to partner with us because of our reputation for integrity and how we treat our employees, not the kind of predator that wanted to break us apart and sell us off. I imagined Keith starting over at 41, learning humility from a boss young enough to be his daughter. It wouldn't be easy for him, but perhaps that was exactly what he needed. Perhaps true character can only be built through genuine struggle. Margaret knocked on my doorframe. Are you all right? Better, I said, and I realized it was the truth. So much better. Do you have any regrets about what happened with Keith? I thought about the question seriously. 6 months ago, firing my own son was unimaginable. Now, looking at the quarterly report showing every department thriving, looking at the satisfaction survey revealing that employees have genuine hope for the company's future. Looking at new partnerships based on mutual respect rather than predatory acquisition, I knew I had made the right choice. No, I finally said, no regrets. That evening, I drove back to Maplewood Lane, passing the oak trees that had grown tall and strong over the decades. My house, despite Keith's plans, it remained my house, appeared warm and welcoming in the twilight. I poured myself a cup of Earl Grey tea and sat in Thomas's old chair, looking out over the garden we had planted together 40 years ago. The roses were in bloom, their red petals appearing especially vibrant against the green leaves. My phone vibrated. It was a text from Janet. "Happy anniversary, boss. Exactly 1 year since you registered Sterling Solutions. Editor's note, it should be the 41st anniversary. Cheers to the next 40 years. I smiled, realizing she was right. It was exactly 41 years since I filed the paperwork to officially establish Sterling Solutions. 40 years of building, struggling, growing, and finally reclaiming everything that had always been mine. I raised my teacup and toasted silently. To Thomas, who gave me the tools I needed to protect our legacy. To Janet and the employees who remained loyal when loyalty seemed meaningless. To Margaret, who helped me reclaim my strength. And even to Keith, who inadvertently taught me that sometimes you must lose everything to remember who you truly are. At 65, I am not finished. I am only just beginning. The roses outside my window swayed gently in the evening breeze, and for the first time in years, I felt complete peace. I still have work to do, a company to manage, and employees to protect. But most importantly, I have finally reclaimed not only my business but myself. Tomorrow will bring new challenges, new opportunities, and new decisions to be made. But tonight, I am exactly where I belong, in my own home, in my own life, surrounded by the fruits of my 40 years of hard work and determination. Keith once called me senile, but I proved that age is just a mask for experience. And as it turns out, experience is the most powerful weapon of all. So, for those of you listening to my story, I am curious. If you were in my position, what would you do? Have you experienced anything similar? Please leave a comment in the section below. Also, I will leave the 2 most popular stories from the channel on the end screen. They will absolutely surprise you. Thank you for watching, and until next time.